Yeah, lovely to be here with you all on this this Sangha night, and I'm really enjoying this series as well. The Dhammapada. I was just changing my shirt to put a shirt on. I had just had a t-shirt on to look a little bit smarter, and I opened my cupboard. On my cupboard, I've got my robe, the robe that I was ordained in, actually not the same one, but the same style. And I just put it on momentarily because when I was getting ordained, I used to read the Dhammapada and memorize 2 verses from the Dhammapada every day. I used to do it while I was cleaning my teeth. We were living up in the mountains in Spain. Very, very simple life, quite sort of austere by our standards, but very, very beautiful as well. So that memory kind of came back to my mind. And the verse that I'm going to talk about is one that instantly sort of struck me. It both struck me and I didn't understand it. So the verse that I've been given to talk about is from the section called Mindfulness. And it goes, mindfulness is the way to the immortal, unmindfulness the way to death. Those who are mindful do not die, whereas the unmindful are like the dead. So it's quite a verse, isn't it? Quite perhaps not a version of mindfulness, a way of talking about mindfulness that we're so familiar with. I was looking at John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, just by contrast. Which goes talks about mindfulness as a process of bringing a certain quality of attention to moment by moment experience. A process of bringing a certain quality of attention to moment by moment experience. Now that's quite different, isn't it? I thought it was quite good definition actually, but it's quite different from mindfulness is the way to the immortal. We're kind of meted, sort of confronted by something profound, something mysterious, something sort of existential. So there's the word for the immortal that's being used here is Matar, which I looked up. So Matar sometimes gets translated as deathless as well. The immortal or the deathless. Mindfulness is the way to the deathless. It's got a common linguistic root with the word ambrosia, so the nectar of immortality. And it's a word that goes back thousands of years before the Buddha. So it's an incredibly rich word for them, and for us, it's slightly odd, slightly mysterious. So we're sort of at a loss, really, to sort of understand this. I think at the same time, it's got a kind of poetic value, hasn't it? The deathless. What on earth is that? It reminds me of Shakespeare's that undiscovered country or unknown country from whose bourne no man returns. The sort of mystery of death must also be there in the mystery of the deathless. And another thing that I found out about this word Amatar is, I found this out on Wikipedia. I hope it's reliable. I'm afraid I couldn't find a better source, not to pass judgment on Wikipedia, but I just don't know. And that is that it's linked with soma. So in the Vedic tradition, pre the Buddha, there was this drug, natural drug that they would take, and it would put them into an ecstatic state in which they could receive the divine poetry of the gods. So Amatar has got this similarity with soma in that it's drunk. It's something that is drunk, and one has an experience of the deathless through it. So it's quite a mysterious kind of term. So mindfulness is the way to the Amatar, the deathless, the ambrosia, the nectar. So the way I want to explore this this verse is through talking or exploring what the Buddha says about mindfulness. And one of the most common terms he uses is a compound term, which is sati sampajanya. So I want to talk about that, and through talking about that, explore what the Buddha is getting at, or what I think the Buddha is getting at, what he seems to be getting at in this verse. So sati is this kind of a bit like John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, this sort of quality of attention to moment by moment experience, our sort of moment by moment bodily sensations. This is what sati is. Being present, being in the present, attending to what's actually happening, the direct experience of our bodily sensations. So in a way, we're probably sort of fairly familiar with this aspect of mindfulness. And when we do actually practice it, when we do attend to our moment by moment bodily sensations, something happens, doesn't it? Suddenly we can see from that sort of vantage point of being established in bodily mindfulness, we can see the mind, we can see our habits of mind happening, responding habitually, automatically. We can see it in plain daylight. And through doing that, we become aware that when we're unmindful, we don't see those, we simply act out of them. We simply act out of those habitual responses of mind. We are defined, our action, our behavior is defined by those habits of mind when we're in an unmindful state. So when we're in a mindful state, I can't quite read my notes here, the light's gone. Yes, it brings choice, doesn't it? Suddenly we can see, look, there is a habit. I don't need to act out of it. Suddenly we can see we have a choice. So we discover something, we wake up to something, we wake up to our own agency. We all, no doubt, have had this experience, but it's kind of quite thrilling, isn't it, when it happens? We wake up to the fact that we are the authors of our lives, of our sort of future, of our experience. When we kind of see this, it can, yeah, as I say, it can be very, very striking. You can sort of wonder at how you were living previously. And it is a little bit comparable, isn't it, to sort of having been in a dead state and having sort of become alive to the fact that your experience is not set. You are the author of your own experience. So that, for me, is one of the connections with particularly this aspect of the verse. The unmindful are like the dead. It's strong language, isn't it? But when we are unmindful, we are just defined by external circumstances in this kind of mechanical kind of way. When we can turn up, be present to our moment by moment experience, we discover we have a choice, and that is the choice of a new life. So this is kind of sati. It's in itself quite far-reaching, isn't it? But perhaps it's more, what would you say, more sort of palatable to us. We're in more comfortable territory with this than we are with sampajanya. It's closer to John Kabat-Zinn's version, his sort of secular version of what mindfulness is. It's closer to our kind of psychological self. It's about sort of conscious agency. And if this is our version of mindfulness, then I suspect we won't manage to sustain it. So one of the things that Vishvapani, who's very involved in the secular mindfulness movement, said, which I found very, very interesting, is that in secular mindfulness, people really struggle. They learn mindfulness, they can get it and do it, but they really struggle to sustain it. the discipline of coming back to your moment by moment experience, moment by moment, day in, day out, year after year, is a bit of a discipline, isn't it? So I found that very interesting. I suspect that it's because this area of sampajanya is fairly unexplored in secular mindfulness. Now, I don't know, I haven't read enough on secular mindfulness to know that, but that is my suspicion. I was reading Subhuti, who said something of in a similar vein, actually. So really, we need to be exploring this second element, sampajanya, in order to be able to sustain a mindfulness practice. That's my experience. I expect it's not just particular to me. So what this is about is there is more than us. There's more to us than our conscious agency. Extraordinary as that is, there's more to us than that. There are kind of deeper forces within the mind. Apparently, the research says that it's discernible in the brain that we have made decisions 7 to 10 seconds before we become conscious of having made a decision. Isn't that interesting? So this notion of the conscious agent is a bit sort of imprecise. There's kind of more going on. So perhaps just to share an experience of this, of these sort of deeper forces or currents in the mind coming into experience. The first sort of strong experience I had of this that I can remember was when I was climbing. I used to rock climb, and I was in the Lake District with my climbing partner. That person just there, you probably can't see. I was on a rock face quite high up in a valley, and I pulled around this corner, climbed around this corner. Underneath it, there was an overhang, so it was quite sort of exposed position high up in the valley. And I realized when I pulled around the corner that I couldn't get back. I realized there was no return. There was a kind of quiver of fear, oh my God. And then my mind just sort of shifted, my mental state just shifted. Suddenly, I was incredibly calm. I was utterly fearless. There was no sense of fear. It was utterly clear what I needed to do. Time had shifted. Somehow, it felt like I could do twice as much in the amount of time that I had. Suddenly, time had sort of slowed up. And I had no idea what had happened. I had absolutely no idea what had happened to me. So that was my first experience of sort of altered states of consciousness. The way the psychologists kind of talk about this is flow. We might think of it as a moment of sort of heightened wakefulness, sort of intensely awake, vividly alive. The psychologists kind of talk about it as flow, and they identify a number of characteristics of this state. That there is a sense of kind of self-forgetting. We sort of forget ourselves. We're effortlessly and deeply involved in whatever activity we are doing. Arthasiddhi, when we were talking about this, shared that sometimes that happens to him when he's cooking. Particularly when he's cooking for friends. He just has this sort of experience of flow, a sort of change of mind state. And what's happening is the deeper currents, the often unconscious currents that aren't interested in our lives, suddenly come into play. So another characteristic of this is that our goals are clear. We have clear goals. So for me, in that climbing situation, my goals suddenly were manifestly clear. If I didn't get up this, I would die. So I had to get up it. Suddenly, that had sort of shifted my mind state. And this is, oh yeah, the last thing I'll say about it was not of my choosing. That was not a state that I had moved into through conscious agency. It was not of my choosing. I had stumbled across it. I had sort of discovered it, unknown as to why it had emerged. I had sort of discovered it. So there are deeper forces in our minds that we can discover that are deeper than sort of the conscious agent, if you see what I mean. And if we don't bring those into being, we probably won't stand much of a chance actually with mindfulness. So clear goals, one of the characteristics. So this links with sampajanya. So sampajanya, what that means is continuity of purpose. There's obviously a link between goals and purpose. So I want to talk about this aspect of mindfulness. Really, they both go together. So what is meant by continuity of purpose is not merely whether you can get out to work, do everything you intended to do and get back without having forgotten your keys. It's not merely that level of sort of continuity of purpose, which is a challenge enough in itself, isn't it? It does include that, but it goes further than that. And it's not merely sort of intention. It's not merely talking about your intention. You can intend to go to the shops and then you get there. What it's really getting at is the deeper purpose to your life. It's sort of going off the deep end here. It's talking about the deeper purpose of your life. What is the deeper purpose of your life? So in some mysterious way, that energy that is the deeper purpose of my life was flowing into my experience up that rock face, was flowing into my activity in that rock face, up that rock face. What was it that drove me up rock faces repeatedly for pleasure? It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? Why we do the things we do. So yeah, just one more thing about to sort of define what this deeper purpose is. Well, we may already feel we have a purpose. You may feel like your purpose is quite clear. But what can happen in life is the proverbial hits the fan, perhaps somebody dies, and suddenly the purpose of your life seems to mean nothing. Suddenly you're asking your question, what am I doing in my life? What am I doing in my life? So it's odd. I think it's sort of part of human nature that we will always find some sort of purpose, but is it this deeper purpose, or are we slightly getting slightly deviating from it? Well, I suspect we will be, and that is why we need to practice sampajanya. I am still constantly, moment by moment, sort of deviating from that purpose. Yeah, so it reminds me, though, talking about this, of my experience before being a Buddhist. I remember, not just in climbing, but actually in conversations, often with my climbing partner, actually. I was about 17, 18, falling into conversations which hit something deeper. And suddenly, the purpose of my life sort of impressed itself upon me. And I'd think, yes, I've discovered the purpose of my life. And then 2 days later, the same thing that we were talking about, the words seemed empty. They seemed not to carry that experience of purpose. It had, like sand, fallen through my fingers. There's something inherently elusive about our deeper purpose in life. In some ways, it's easier to see in other people. That's the easiest. That's perhaps the easier way to sort of see what I'm getting at. So I thought I would talk about a friend, a friend who told me his life story. He got involved in Buddhism about the same time as I did. He was a couple of years older. We both lived in Sheffield for a time, so there were lots of commonality. But in his life, he was talking about his experience of clubbing. Now, I wasn't interested in clubbing, actually. I was interested in climbing, but he was really interested in clubbing. And he was sort of oddly interested. I couldn't work out why he was so interested. But for him, there was something of a deeper nature, sort of trying to find expression through his clubbing. And he could see through getting involved in Buddhism that there was that pattern that was sort of trying to find expression, that purpose that was trying to find expression in his clubbing, was finding fuller expression in trying to create spiritual community. Really, that was it was the same thing that was sort of trying to push its way through his life in clubbing, kind of bringing people together. As with discovering spiritual community, then he sort of fell away in a way from the spiritual community, and he kept doing kind of lots of group work. He was training up to be this sort of group leader and that sort of group leader and this sort of communication expert and all that sort of stuff. In a way, it was the same pattern that was trying to sort of find expression through a different thing. He's more recently sort of got back involved with the spiritual community, and he a few weeks ago said to me, I know what my purpose is. I need to be practicing spiritual community. I need to be creating spiritual community. In a way, it was manifestly clear to me that was the case, but there was something sort of getting in the way. Perhaps I'll say a bit more about that. But the main point I want to make is that our purpose is sort of set. It's continuous. It's the same purpose. We perhaps don't grasp it all. Grasp probably isn't quite the right word. We don't appreciate it all. We appreciate just a bit of it as it expresses itself in a particular area of our life. But yes, it's much easier to see in other people. It's hard to see in ourselves. So I just wanted to read you a little excerpt from Bhante Sangha actually talking about this. So he says, however it comes about, in talking about this deeper purpose, however it comes about, when we become aware of that sense of direction, we should do whatever we can to dwell upon it, intensify our experience of it, and allow it to permeate and transform us. So I found that really interesting, allow it to permeate and transform us. So that's partly why it's so difficult to stay in touch with this. It's inherently elusive because it's beyond us. When we are in touch with it, it transforms us. Often we want it the other way around. We want to be in control, deciding our purpose. We want to be calling the shots. We want to be the conscious agent, but actually no, it's beyond us. And that means that's why it's inherently sort of elusive. So really we need, in order to bring it into focus in our life, we need an ideal in our life that is bigger than us. We need a transcendent ideal, one that transcends self. It was only when I came into contact with Buddhism that I started to make sense. What on earth is this strange experience of sudden purpose and meaning, and then loss of it? I couldn't understand the nature of it. So we need a transcendent ideal, which the Buddha is, in order to sort of make sense of what's happening. So it's a bit like Bhante talked about this as in the path, when we discover our deeper purpose, we get on the path. That our deeper purpose is the path for us, the individual nature of the path. There is a relationship with the goal. So Amatar, the deathless, is the goal. It's another word for nirvana. So he says, just as the seed has within it something of the flower, so within the path there is something of the goal. So it's not just that we have an idea of enlightenment. As we are practicing, we sort of drink of the Amatar. We have our experience of our purpose is quite mysterious. We've got in this verse, the mindful do not die. What on earth does that mean? That is mysterious, isn't it? It doesn't mean, biologically we don't die. It's pointing to something deeper than that. So when we have these experiences of our deeper purpose, which are, of course, in our life, they're rarer. We have these sort of sudden, certainly in their fuller, more intense sort of moments. Somehow our purpose is sort of coming through us. We forget ourselves. At the same time, we're sort of more conscious. We're not sort of, our agency isn't sort of squashed. It's extraordinary. It's really sort of quite extraordinary what is happening there. I couldn't tell you what is happening there. But this point about somehow that experience of the path, that experience of mindfulness, the flower exists somehow in the seed. So the goal, the deathless, we get a sort of flavor, an echo of the deathless. I'm not suggesting that just by having an experience of our purpose that we're enlightened, certainly not. What I am saying is what is happening is really mysterious. It's beyond, it's sort of beyond, my experience of it is that I can't understand what is actually happening in that moment. So the mindful, those who are mindful do not die. There is something more mysterious going on. When we die, who dies? It's us that dies, isn't it? It's the self that dies. But in these heightened experience of our purpose, the self is somehow in abeyance. What is going on? Something is going on, something more vivid is going on. But what is it? We do not know. So we can have these sort of intensified experiences of our purpose. And of course, when we have that experience, it's sort of, we realize something about the significance of the spiritual life. It motivates us to pursue it. As I say, we're always sort of following, always deviating from this, moment by moment. It's embarrassing. It's thoroughly embarrassing. As you practice more, you only become more aware of how frequently you're deviating from it. I can tell you. What we do, I'll say a bit about how we pursue this. But just before that, I want to say about how we get this wrong, because what we tend to do is we tend to sort of concretize it. We experience this sort of greater sense of purpose in a particular context, whether it be through climbing or the Sangha, and then we kind of concretize it. We think that is it. These sort of external conditions are it, but it's not it. Our purpose, as I say, is elusive. It's more elusive than that. It requires us to grow. So as soon as we identify a context in which we have an intensified experience of our deeper purpose, well, not as soon as, but it's going to sort of, if we grow in that context, there'll come a point when those circumstances no longer invite us to grow. So our purpose is sort of asking us to grow. So it's always transcending the conditions that bring it about, if you see what I mean. So another reason why it's inherently sort of elusive. At one time in our life, we need to do this, but then it sort of changes somehow. So this is again why we need to discern what our deeper purpose is, in order that we don't just get stuck to particular circumstances. Anyway, but actually, to discover it, we do need to find the conditions in which it's currently happening now. So if you're sort of thinking, oh my God, I think I'm not in touch with this, what is it? Well, you will be. It will be at play somewhere in your life. Maybe not very keenly now, in which case you feel a sort of sense of emptiness, certain feelings of sort of emptiness. That's a good thing to experience that, because it's indicating that you're out of touch with it. Then you can get back in touch with it. But yeah, we need to find the conditions. So an example for me a while ago was supporting classes. I found that when I supported classes, often I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go on that night to think, oh, I want to watch a film, I want to do anything but support a class. And then I go over to the centre. By the end of the night, I like completely forgotten myself. I'd been taken out of myself. I was just thoroughly engaged and involved in what I was doing. Well, it's really, really important that we identify those experiences and the conditions in which they are happening, because in that way we identify how to, as Sangha actually puts it, how to intensify our experience of our deeper purpose. So I've gone slightly over time, but I'll just finish that that line. So reading on, once you are conscious of yourself unfolding within the framework of conditionality, you can make a directed effort to strengthen the process of growth and remove obstacles from its path. This is mindfulness of purpose, sampajanya. You can make a directed effort to strengthen the process of growth and remove obstacles from its path. This is mindfulness of purpose, sampajanya. So really we need we need to be working on both aspects of mindfulness. They are like two wings of a bird, which is why the Buddha talks about sati sampajanya. He talks about them together. Often I think sampajanya gets sort of missed off the agenda in our way of talking about mindfulness. We're just talking about moment by moment experience, moment by moment awareness. But actually within that, we also want to be discerning the deeper purpose to our life, so that we can follow that purpose, and mindfulness can then lead us to the deathless, lead us to nirvana. So I'll finish just by reading the verse again. Mindfulness is the way to the immortal, unmindfulness the way to death. Those who are mindful do not die, whereas the unmindful are like the dead.